can't assume a coworker to come up.
So if I fail to connect you,
Well, at any rate, we
sorry, I haven't just brought it back. No, that's fine.
yeah, when I started talking about it.
Don't single her out.
I shouldn't have done that. Right? That's not right. Hey folks, we ready to get going? It's after 7 now. Hopefully you're here for a public meeting to look at revised design concepts for Triangle Park and for Lazarus Park. I'm Jim Gish. If anybody here doesn't know me, I'm the community liaison for the Middlebury Rail and Bridge Project. About to enter year 4 of my tenure here as your community liaison. Only 3 more to go. So thank you all for coming out. I know it's a busy season. It's winter. It's great to see you all out here and engaged in our process here. So I'm going to turn this right over to the folks, but let me just make some introductions first. Many of these the people you're going to hear from tonight you know. Starting with on my left, Aaron Guyette, who is the engineering lead from VHB. Aaron is not only in charge of designing this project, he designed that little bridge over here that has been a real boon to our town, Cross Street Bridge, that opened up in 2010. On my right here is Mark Hamlin. Mark is the Director of Land Planning and Landscape Architecture for VHB. He's been instrumental in taking feedback from you, from the Planning Commission, from the Design Advisory Committee, and he's going to show the results of that feedback tonight and some revised concepts. Over on my right here is Judith Ehrlich. Judith is V-Trans's Historic Preservation Officer. Her role in advising the team on the design changes has been critical. Over on the right here too is John Griffin. John is the V-Trans project manager for the project. So on top of all the operational details and running the project for V-Trans, and all the way at the back, because he's a humble guy, but he's got the purse strings, is Matt DiGiovanni from Federal Highway Administration. And so it's great to have Matt here too. I think I've covered everything, so I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who will run through tonight's agenda, and then we'll get right into the thick of things, okay? So thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Jim. So I know everybody wants to jump right into the design, but if you'll indulge me for just a few minutes with a little bit of background information. I think everybody knows why we're here. The Bridge and Rail Project, and the reconstruction of Main Street, Merchants Row bridges, reconstruction of the rail corridor, and then a few public spaces as well. So first I want to talk a little bit about some of the landscape design influences as we've developed this, this portion of the project. So we're looking at what's allowable by the environmental regulations and the permits applicable to this project. We're incorporating input from the public, and we're incorporating input from town government and boards. So related to environmental regulations, there have been a number of questions throughout this process about what is allowable within that space. Can we change the space? Can we remove elements or add elements? And we're trying to navigate through these regulations that we're required to follow, mostly because there is a federal nexus here. Federal dollars are funding most of this project. So there's National Environmental Policy Act, it's NEPA. This is an overall look at the project and the impacts on social, economic, and environmental portions. It's a very broad brush, and this process was completed last year. We then get into a couple of additional, more specific regulations. The U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966, and specifically Section 4F of that act. This has to do with use of public lands for transportation. And that section prohibits the use of public lands for transportation unless there is no feasible and prudent alternatives. So that includes parks, wildlife areas, waterfowl refuges, as well as public and private historic properties. And then there's the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. and specifically Section 106 of that act. It protects listed or eligible to be listed National Register Historic Places from adverse effects that would diminish their integrity. So what does that mean for this project here? Related to Section 4F, it means we can't change, we can't have permanent changes to decrease the size of the park. That would be considered an adverse effect. And so that means no encroachment or changing the curb lines or allowing additional parking within those original park limits. And then related to Section 106, historic, so no adverse effects to the Village Green Park will be allowed. We really have to maintain that historic integrity, and the park in the finished product needs to fit the historical context of the historic district. It's within a historic district, and it itself is a historic place listed in the National Register. Diving down a little bit deeper, that means the fountain has to stay within the park. It adds to the historic fabric of the park, and it really needs to be on that central access where it's located and where it's been in the design concepts that have been presented. And then we need to provide a park that has the right feel to it, the right contextual scale, and then the right mix of grass and green space combined with the hardscape. So just kind of consider that as we go through these concepts. And then very quickly, just wanted to touch on the process so far, where we are, and then the next steps. We gathered a lot of information about the sites. We've been working on the project now for several years, as Jim had pointed out, but really dug into this landscape design earlier this year. So gathered a lot of site information. In the spring of this year, we got together, brainstorming, public meeting in June. We developed design concepts as a team from June to September, got back in front of the public in September to present those initial concepts. We've gone away and based upon that public input, we've gone away and done additional refinement. Mark presented to the select board in November, and as a result of that meeting, we got asked to present as well to the Planning Commission and the Design Advisory Committee. Also in November, we refined, just last week, we refined the concepts a little bit further. So here we are today, public meeting, December. Coming out of this meeting, a little bit more refinement, and then ultimately our goal is to present a recommended alternative to the select board at their next meeting on December 11th, so next Tuesday. So we're gathering all the input that we've received through the project to date, input from the public, the environmental side of things, input from the town boards and committees, putting that together with some principles in landscape design, landscape architecture, and making a recommendation to the select board and ultimately asking for their endorsement. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's going to talk about a couple of the concepts that were circulated. They're posted online, circulated through, I think, through Jim's blog, the town email list, and then we're going to talk a little bit further about some of the main themes that we've heard for input so far.
There's plenty of seats over here if you folks want to come in and get a closer look. There's 2 here, 2 there, some back there.
Down here's fun. I'm gonna come right in front of you. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so there's 2 boards outside that have been circulated around. We had them here last week. I'll briefly go through those to catch everybody up who wasn't here last week on it. Some of the key design considerations we used as we started sketching this out. There was a lot of concern over they want flexibility of use as a public gathering space and plaza. So it would be comfortable for large events, art shows, craft shows, farmers market type of fairs, and then still be comfortable for small gatherings when it's not being used heavily and big. Connectivity to both parks, to the riverfront and Marble Works. In this sketch, this is Main Street. Here's Merchants Row, the Patel Bach, St. Stephen's, down Painter's Alley there, Printer's Alley. that leads you to the riverfront area in Marble Works. As Aaron went through, the inclusion of the historic fountain was a requirement through the permit process. Integration of the church memorial garden and connectivity of that back to the main part of the village green. And this sketch here that we had, it's basically organized street trees along the edge, 30 feet on center.
What do you mean a street tree?
Big, like canopy shade trees
Okay.
to, define the edge of the walk. There's a sidewalk along in front of that. There's the historic stone ashlar blocks we're reusing from the tunnel as benches.
Is there a chance you could use the microphone?
Well, the microphone, it won't help, unfortunately. These microphones are only connected to the recording equipment. It's not a PA system.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
There's some seats up here.
With the desire to have like more plaza space than what was in the original park, we made these areas 20 feet wide. We're suggesting movable tables and chairs under those. The fountain got moved closer. This arcing path comes across through here. So this is all like flat and one big plane, so you can use it multiple different ways. There aren't grade level changes going on in it. Went back this way by the memorial garden. There's a row of trees here that are like lower to the ground. They're like an apple or a flowering type tree. That allows some sense of intimacy back here, but you still look over those to the historic architecture of the church that's providing that three-dimensional architectural frame on the backside. You go to the park, Lazarus Park. We showed a couple options here. Here's a simple path coming down at 10%. There's a couple seating areas and lawn, and then a hardscape at the bottom, and once again, shade trees line it. That connects right across to these guys. Go to the next one. The second option, after we talked with the select board, we made the hardscape plaza area even bigger. We still kept the street trees delineating the edge, which is like a historic feature to the park, part of keeping that historic character that Aaron mentioned. Slightly different configuration here, and then a simpler layout down there where we're closer to the street and there's no lawn actually presented. You can see in both these, the fountain and the memorial garden are on the historic axis.
And so I think probably worth pointing out that these two options were developed following the input in the September public meeting. And so Mark had gone back through.
You need to speak loudly for people, I think.
Understood. Mark had gone back through all of the input that received so far, all the input from that meeting, the ideas and brainstorming, and had really worked on developing these concepts. These are the same concepts that were presented to the select board at the end of November and presented to Planning Commission Design Advisory Committee.
And last week in that, we received input from every single Planning Commission member and Design Advisory Committee member and the public that was there. And then I've made some adjustments to try and incorporate some of those ideas in.
So we don't have a third option, but we do have, as we had talked about for our process, we've got a working draft going for incorporating those main themes, making some tweaks before we get ready to present to the select board. So we're gonna talk about our working draft. Some of the main themes that we heard were to increase the hardscape in the village green beyond what was shown in Concept A. To increase flowers and plantings in the village green area, to include pedestrian bump outs at the crosswalks. They were shown on Merchants Row in one location, so to show those at additional.
What's a bump out?
Talking about something like this here.
Is it higher on the road?
It's only about an inch or two higher.
But a bit higher, so it looks obvious, is that the point?
Correct.
It's a different material and texture.
It's
Yeah.
similar to what you'd see at the roundabout here.
Right.
Eliminate the grassed areas in Lazarus Park. There was a few comments about that perhaps concept B that was presented was better from a maintenance standpoint. And then there were several comments about ADA accessibility through Lazarus Park. And we're going to show you a concept that does incorporate ADA accessibility. However, it spills onto the neighboring property, so it's not all within the town property. And there may be possibility to work with the town on seeing if that is potential. But to make that work, we had to kind of spill beyond our limits. So, Mark, do you want to just walk through the modifications or changes that you made?
Okay, so we started back with our Plan A and went through tweaking things and adjusting things to try and adapt to what we heard from last week's meeting on this. So, in this scheme here, the request for more hardscape, we incorporate, these used to be in this area grass panels. They become now more of a pervious paver material. The fountain moved even closer to the street. It's now 20 feet forward from its original position. I thought that gave much more flexibility to use for the whole centerpiece of the park.
And can we pause there just for a moment? Some of the coordination that we've done related to Section 106, that historic contextual feel of the park, coordinated with Judith on this. This is the maximum amount of hardscape that we can design into the project. And so we've heard loud and clear, more hardscape. This is really the maximum amount.
Maximum based on historical concepts?
Yeah.
Context.
Context.
Yep, historical context.
From a scale standpoint,
Hold on, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. So just out of curiosity, what was the rationale
A little louder.
what was some of the reasons for increasing the hardscape as opposed to having like more lawn and so on?
Yeah, there was some sentiment that hardscape may provide for more versatility of use throughout the entire year. So in the winter, it could potentially be plowed. In the spring, during mud season, it would still provide a stable surface.
for like scale, the distance from here to here is about 60 feet. It's about the width of Church Street. It's kind of a nice scale for an urban hardscape that still feels reasonably comfortable without feeling you're out in the middle of a parking lot somewhere. Going on with that, we incorporate the request for more flowers. Traditionally, these edges had berms and plantings and a variety of plant materials. So combining use of the ashlar blocks with planters in front and still allowing access into the park at each one of these places.
What are the words you said? The what? The ash?
Those big stone blocks that are part of the tunnel construction,
sorry, I
those are
didn't know.
benches in this.
So, Mark, I wonder if we just pause there for a moment and just point out the differences between concept A and this
On the street edge.
specific to these here.
Yeah, in this scheme, you can see right here, there's a bench and then a flower bed in front of that. They could be pollinators, they could be annuals, they could be perennials. And then on either side of the tree, there's 5-foot walks and a flat grate. So it's 15-foot wide open. You can walk into the park anywhere you see a tree.
So I'm going to just flip back
Then
to
you
the
go to
other
the other
concept just so you can point out.
And then in this version, we were suggesting movable tables instead of the benches. And the ashlar blocks actually go perpendicular next to the tree, so you get roughly a 20-foot space in between that the tables and things would be in instead of the historic stone blocks.
Okay, thanks.
Everything's still on access. We've located the utilities now on these plans because there's a lot of concern about connecting in and sweeping this corner. Unfortunately, this whole corner is one big utility bank of transformers and poles and
Yeah, there's some existing utilities there today or pre-project, and we have actually added a single-phase transformer to eliminate the poles in that area, but it does add to the utilities there.
But, you know, it's all coming together here with this existing path coming in, a new crosswalk across the street with a bump out here to shorten the pedestrian distance. Over on this side, here's the bump outs that were suggested last week. It makes it so that people don't have to feel like they're crossing as wide. That connects to this area at Lazarus Park. We've opened up the front of this from some of the things we said, and then it's calculated out. Handicapped access requires a certain maximum slope on a ramp. It's like 0.083, 2.5 feet per every 30 feet. So you can't go beyond that, then you need a 5-foot landing area. So you need a certain length to do the 11 feet drop to get down there. So this is worked out where you come downhill to a landing here, and then there's a path that comes back around the back side of that sitting area.
And so we talked about potential property line issues. In order to make that work, we had to push really further onto the MarbleWorks property as this is shown. So the project does not own that property right now. This is just kind of a potential solution. It's owned by the MarbleWorks.
Excuse me, Aaron, if we have questions as you go along, would you rather we hold them or?
I think you can.
If you got specific about what we're talking about, feel free to ask them.
Yeah.
My one question was, right now, there is one utility pole right in what I would call the southeast corner. No, I'm sorry, of, yes, right about there, except down a little bit. And there's one remaining utility pole. Is that going to be removed, and would it be underground? And there's another one that goes across up toward Main Street, but will that still have to be there? It's pretty bad.
My understanding is that the utility pole would be removed.
It will be moved?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay,
I think there's one line that remains to service a
It goes
light.
right, yeah, it goes
light.
right across the park.
There's a light in the park and potentially could be served from the Court Square area instead of from this pole.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Well, since trees are mentioned, I want to get something. And when a couple years ago, coming home from Maine, New Hampshire, part of Vermont, and into Middlebury, it went from beautiful to ugly, like the trees in front of the People's Bank and stuff like that. And there was no color, maybe one tree. This year, I know we had horrible weather, but it was all yellow. All of it to Burlington practically was yellow from, I think they're Japanese trees, I don't know. But we're not in Japan, and we lost our four most beautiful maples that were red in front of the, what was where we had town hall, and the two beautiful pines that were moved from there, and then the two beautiful maples that were between the library and that house. And they all had to go. And what you're putting back is just yellow, and short, yellow, ugly. They're not even pretty in winter when they don't have anything. They're just unattractive.
These
and
are-
I want to
these are
know
big
that
ones.
those trees, I would like to see maples, ones that turn
Yep.
red, ones that turn red.
We can pick an urban resistant one that turns red.
Yeah.
We can
See?
pick cultivars
Well,
that turn
that's what I was saying. I think anytime you put in something new, must be changed. Please think of the fact that our town, there was nothing to photograph. You know, you always see the visitors photographing the red tree, and now there was none. So, it really bothers me to call us a New England town without New England in it. That's all.
Yeah. Sorry, Adam, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. I have a question about the utilities, and it is, are you basically designing them so that the town of Middlebury will have easy access to water or sewer or electric or other things in the future if it wants to put future amenities in and around that area?
Water and electric should be readily available. Water to the fountain, obviously. Electric also to the fountain to power the pump. I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is lighting. There will be lighting that's incorporated. We really need to kind of zero in on the concept and then develop a lighting plan that goes with that. But lighting, obviously, as well would require electric.
How? You'll incorporate it how?
Once we have the concept defined, then looking at the areas to be lit after that. we don't want to go through and design a lighting plan for this concept and for the next one and for the next. So we'll zero in on the concept and then provide appropriate lighting.
Simplistic forms, the edge of the street will pick up on, the standard lights fixtures that you're using in the town. And then it's a matter of determining levels of light within the park that the town's comfortable with.
Can you talk a little bit more in Lazarus Park to the right of the sidewalk, what's going on in the design? And then I have a second part of that question.
This one is reflecting the comments from last week about not having a lot of grass for mowing. In back of this path here, those are seen as big canopy shade trees to back it up with masses of shrubs. And then up in this area with the pink, those are more of a flowering tree in masses. And then once again, a couple layers of, big moving masses of whether they're grasses or other native shrub material.
So my second question is respecting the historical requirements of the design. Do any of you have experience incorporating more creative elements that would attract young families that could fit within Section 106? For example, built into, it sounds like it's shrubs, like a slide built into because it's a downhill slope anyway. And have any of you experienced projects where towns are able to find funding to support something within the federal requirements, realizing that the federal funding wouldn't be able to support that type of design element? I guess I feel like I would love to have a bit of fun for young children right downtown, and I worry if we don't incorporate that into a new design that will hopefully stick around Middlebury for a long, long time, we're kind of missing an opportunity.
I've had experience designing a lot of different recreation facilities, whether they're formal for parks departments or natural play areas with logs and things like that, and state parks. And, I'm not sure within the historical context how you actually weave that in, or if the town, once they get a hold of it, you guys add something you want. Over here, that's really not a historical situation.
And from a design perspective, are there any benefits for planning or thinking about that now, or not? Doesn't matter.
Well, it all depends on the scale of what you're alluding to. Is it a big playground, or is it something the town can add a couple pieces here and there, through their recreation department?
Before we move on, and just really funny case, this project's funded through highway funds. We typically don't have any projects that deal with our play areas. However, once in a while there is, some congressional act or something that'll push something through us. Maybe, like the skate park in Burlington came through our office, but it's pretty rare. And usually the towns hear about these things, but it's all very rare, or at least the same funding that we're using for this project.
Let's get over here.
Yeah. The vegetation area in Lazarus Park, that's on a slope.
Yeah, 10%.
So what is being done to help prevent the runoff that can occur from a heavy precipitation event?
Well, I think you'd have to heavily mulch it, and hopefully the plant materials themselves, dense enough planted, would be the thing.
I guess my concern would be, unless there's some kind of swales or something, it could just create a real problem.
Yeah. We have to properly drain it. We haven't done grading plans on it. It's just basically we know from top to bottom now how far it is. It's not like a 20% slope. It's not like the bank off over here going down to the lower parking lot. It's just slightly steeper than a handicap ramp.
I want to go back to the question about grandchildren and grandchildren loving to come to this place. Have we thought about a significant wading pool around the fountain we have to put there so that kids will just love coming there and stay there in warm weather? Is that very difficult?
We were discussing that.
I think we have considered it. There's a little bit of, it's a little bit contrary to more hardscape for the versatility of uses. I think there's also, even beyond that point, there is an existing base that was removed as the beginning part of this project, and that is the intent, to put that base back.
We have to put that back.
Mm-hmm.
The base of the fountain, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the base of the fountain.
It wasn't there previously before they started this construction? It was not there? Or was it?
It was there before this construction started.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
What about
There was
it
a fountain
spreading, what about the water flowing over the existing, the former base, which we remember, into a larger space where kids can just splash? Is that difficult? I think that would be.
There was a little bit of a gray area, whether that was altering too much from the historical nature of the fountain. So I couldn't say definitively.
Gray area from the historic perspective, but also, again, contrary to provide more hardscape for the versatile use, right? It's kind of, if you increase the size of the pool.
You mean flat hardscape, not a wading pool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on that?
Oh, I agree with them. We discussed this at length, and the idea of I was thinking of it as sort of like a reflecting pool around the fountain. And I think it would be lovely, but it changes the look and feel of this historic fountain. And it also, as Aaron's saying, it would reduce the amount of the hardscape that we're hearing is really desired by a lot of people in town. So while I think it would look very nice, I don't think it would fit appropriately with the historic setting of this triangle park.
I don't agree with you.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yep.
In terms of the decision between hardscape, more hardscape versus the fountain. So when the first public comments on this were being held, was the possibility of a wading fountain presented, or was it hardscape versus grass? Because the question is, well, more hardscape means more versatility, so you can conduct more activities in the area. Having a wading fountain or whatever would mean you could conduct different activities, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's less versatile as an overall area. So, so was it presented as hardscape, grass, or fountain, and then everyone said, okay, no hardscape, or was it just hardscape and grass, and then fountain idea? Because if it wasn't presented, then maybe it has more support than we realize.
There was no presentation of a larger fountain base area, but I think it was a comment that was received just last week. I think going back and thinking about several different points here. One is the public input that we've received, and input from the Planning Commission and Design Advisory Committee of the versatile space throughout all seasons, right? If you have a wading pool, you can use it during the summer months, but in the winter, it's not going to be as versatile as a flat open space, whether it's hardscape or whether it's grass. I think there's more versatility during those off months, outside of summer. I think we've got an existing base already of appropriate scale and size to replace it, and the project from the very beginning had planned to remove the existing base, remove the fountain, and place them both back in an appropriate location on that central access.
Looks about 12 feet wide.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the base does make a difference.
Yep.
These kids used to play in it before it was removed.
Sorry, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to go back to the comment we had a little bit earlier about inviting different uses of the space. And I wanted to start by just saying I live this way, off of South Street, and I work from home, which means I'm in town a lot, and I'm going back and forth a lot. And maybe 6-9 months ago, maybe longer, it occurred to me that I didn't often see anybody, quite frankly, in the new park where the town offices used to be. And so then I actually started paying attention. And I would say 9 out of 10 times, at least, when I go by that park, no one is not a single person is in the park. And I'm not a landscape architect. I don't know what specifically to suggest to you, but I think it's lovely, this park. I don't find it disagreeable from a visual standpoint, but I think it's just too bad. I think we could have lovely and use. And I would hope that if we take a step back for a second, that we could build, that we could stay, I don't know if others agree, but if we're a stated goal that we try to build into these parks in ways to encourage people of all ages to use it, to come in, to engage, to stay there. I don't know how to do that, but that's my comment I wanted to make tonight, so thank you.
Thanks for your comment. I think just to follow up on some of the hardscape comments that we had received earlier, some of the sentiment behind that was that by providing, a blank slate, or I mean, it's not all hardscape, but it's a flat surface. By providing that, it allows for the community to then provide different uses, and then to draw people in through those different uses of the park.
Some of the things that make people feel comfortable in outdoor space, it's almost like you create outdoor rooms. In this design here, the large canopy street trees at the edge. The other thing is people like the edge conditions. They do films of urban plazas, and people are always using the edges. The middle it's crossed, but it's not where they hang out. As a species, we like that sense of enclosure and human scale to it. So what we were trying to do here was create that street edge with the trees, then have a lot of the main activity occurring right along the edge of that, and the same along the back here. And then the buildings also provide a sense of framework for it. Whereas I think possibly that park, you're a little more out in the open, it's large. It's not in the heart of the downtown, so there's not a lot of people walking right through it as there would be here. I think this one's going to feel fairly comfortable, especially if we had the tables out there, when it's only a few people using it, or, fill this whole thing up for it's a concert kind of thing.
There was a comment made at the last public meeting. Could you speak up? Sorry. The comment at the last public meeting about the fountain was to keep it in a good central location, but put it back towards the church. It would be more fitting with their memory garden, it seems to me, and where it's being proposed now, it's just using up valuable space that, any activity on that hardscape is going to have to work around this fountain. I'm wondering, is the base considered historic, or, do you have to use the base? It's a cement addition, isn't it? It's not part of the original
I believe
fountain.
it's marble.
It's marble.
It's
Yeah.
marble? Oh,
Yeah,
well.
base.
Underneath the marble, to support the marble, is
Right.
a concrete base, which would be new.
12, 15 feet, that takes a good chunk out of the stretch of...
There's a couple of things to consider. First is the replacement of the bridges is resulting in a tunnel, right? So that goes through underneath the green. It's hard to see, but there are dashed lines. We can't have the fountain over the top of the tunnel.
Can you talk louder, please?
Yeah, we
Can't
can't
have the fountain.
over the top of the tunnel. So we really looked at between the tunnel and the edge of the street, where to place it appropriately from the historic context to keep it on the center axis, but also to open the space up as much as possible.
Fountains are an attracting element for people. So we were thinking, along with that whole edge theory of the edge being comfortable, it opens up more visibility for people coming by to see it in there, as well as to interact, where we think people are going to be hanging out. And then it keeps the rest of it open for a variety of uses for the bigger events.
Just to quickly, I read the notes from the last two meetings and this one, and I haven't heard any or a whole lot of love for the fountain that's being replaced or brought back, the design of it, the aesthetics of it. And I'm just wondering, and I feel like at the last meeting there was also a lot of critical comments about the fountain, and so I'm just wondering, must we bring back this space And what you, it seems like no one loves the fountain.
I do.
I do too.
I do, but I didn't know I was supposed to say.
Well, maybe, I mean,
My
I
kids
do want to
grew
hear
up with
that.
that
So far,
fountain.
I've just heard, I don't like that fountain. I've heard a lot of critical comments about the fountain design.
Historically, I think we have to have
That fountain.
It's, the design of the fountain was first put out in 1908, stayed for a while, was dismantled, and then a similar fountain from a similar design and from the same original foundry was reinstalled in '76. The fountain has been part of that park for a long, long time.
And does the '76 one that was installed look very similar to the earlier one?
That's my understanding. It's missing, I guess, a piece from the top. So, but it is very similar to the original. And it's considered a contributing feature of Triangle Park. And Triangle Park is considered a part of the overall Village Green. And the Village Green is listed on the National Register.
I see.
So
thanks for clarifying that.
sure. And historic resources aren't always beautiful, or they may not always be appealing to everyone.
Sure.
It's about their past and how they're associated with the town.
Sure.
That makes, also adds to their importance.
And removal of the fountain would put the funding of not only just the park works, but the entire project in jeopardy. And so.
That settles that.
Yeah, in the back.
I'd like to make a just quick comment about the fountain, and then I have another larger point to make. And that is, everything I heard you say doesn't mean that the fountain has to be on that axis. My understanding is that that fountain has kind of moved around a little bit, and so that fountain could be part of this park, but maybe a little bit more off to the side, whereas right now it takes a very prominent place in the center of what is otherwise a pretty usable space. And so I would love to see the fountain considered where it's less central to the flexible space, maybe off to the side a little bit where it would be enjoyed in a slightly more intimate manner. The fountain in Vermont is very attractive for a very short part of the year. And for the rest of the year, it's a little bit of a liability.
So we did consider that. We heard several comments, I believe, one or two last week. It's something we talked about at length with Judith as well. And really, we did make the point that it has to be on the central axis because it is considered part of the historical context and the symmetry.
What defines that axis?
Excuse me?
What defines that axis? Like, what is the line drawn between?
We drew this line between the intersection, but it's about the symmetry of the area, and
I see.
And it would not fit with the context to move that fountain to some random location.
Sounds a little bit more subjective, but I'd like to move on to my larger point, and that is that we spend an awful lot of time in this town talking about parking. And I believe that angled parking on Merchants Row on both sides of the street would allow for a much easier use of that park space. And I understand the argument that you're making about not being able to decrease the size of that park. But I would like to make a proposition that this park is much, much larger than it used to be. There used to be, I don't know the dimensions, but a 20 or 30 foot wide by a couple 100-foot long cut that was not a park and was not applicable. And so I could make a strong argument that this park is already much larger than what was there. And so the 300 square feet that it would take to put angled parking in is a drop in the bucket compared to that extra space that is being gained by covering over the tunnel.
Sure, and we understand that. Those thoughts. Really, if you go back to before the railroad, the entire area was a park. And so it's returning to that pre-railroad condition.
But that's not the justification for the funding. That's a different argument.
It all makes up the historical context, though.
I can add to this, the 4F piece. We're essentially what I'm saying is the funding is probably going to be gone if you were to cut in and add parking. So I think we should probably get away from parking because of the parks piece. It's part of the environmental commitments of this project. And it's just not going to be, unfortunately. I understand that that's a big piece, and you guys want more parking for businesses. get that access.
It's not even for
But
businesses,
This is
it's
just
to make
a
that
law
useful.
and it's tied to the funding and I can't, unfortunately.
To me, it sounds like an interpretation. I work on historical projects. I'm an architect. I work on historical projects. Those rules, just if you make a strong case for why you're doing it and show that you're actually not reducing the size of the park, but you're actually enlarging the size of the park, there's a justification for doing that. And so to me, it sounds like an interpretation is being used to substitute for a rule. And it's a little bit kind of hard to hear.
I'd like to build upon a number of the comments been made and to ask a question first. Could you, for a moment, further touch on the access from the main area through Printers Alley, going to the Marble Works to the park, the Falls Park? You have not spoken about the sidewalk that leads up against the bank building, as well as that somewhat indiscriminate grassy area up on the building. Could you talk about that?
So let me touch on that. The Printers Alley area was originally, prior to this project, owned by the National Bank of Middlebury. National Bank of Middlebury has since given that property to the town. The town owns the former Lazarus parcel, which makes up the rest of Printers Alley. As part of giving the property to the town, the National Bank of Middlebury, in their deeded document, required this strip of land adjacent to their building, the sidewalk, and the curb. So that's all part of the legal document with the National Bank of Middlebury. This is not something really that we're part of for the design or for the landscaping over there. And
I'll make a quick comment about that and then I'll move on.
Yeah.
With your concept finalized, and with perhaps future consideration about creating a promenade and a true way from one park to the other that makes good public sense, it's possible that the bank would reconsider the walkway and that indiscriminate green strip that will die under the best of circumstances. The reason I bring that up is that I think everybody would speak to the fact that the public vehicle thoroughfare is currently and has always been quite narrow, that goes down from the main street to the lower park. And it would make good sense to make that as wide as possible to give the broad feeling.
So just pause. Let me pause there.
Rather than pause, let me elaborate a bit further.
Okay.
You have two major given access ways from the main street to the lower park, and I don't quite understand why you would need two of them, one 15 feet away from the other, if you emphasized the accessible promenade way through Lazarus Park from the main street and from the Triangle Park. I don't see why you would need a secondary one that leads along the building, and actually was to some extent dangerous being so close to the driveway in the first place. That would make the driveway wider and safer, and would make the Lazarus Park walkway more usable and greater feature. So before you comment, let me keep going. I also wonder why the crosswalk proposed, the existing crosswalk, rather than a new proposed crosswalk in a similar location, going from Triangle Park to Lazarus Park, would make sense, being broadened and more promenade-like, slowing down the traffic on the main thoroughfare, and also indirect access, axis, A-X-I-S, along the tunnel access going across. Third, an observation would be, and I agree with Sam totally, I think that there is a real possibility that would make a lot of sense for the fountain to be featured very close to the memorial park of the church that's up against the existing fence in the back on the access that you're proposing, and it is not in the way of the tunnel opening underneath. It's behind it or closer to St. Stephen's, so therefore it would not be problematic. Another observation is that the green grass won't be green grass long if, as the town would like, and I totally support their ideas, to have that truly publicly used, the grass will be unattractive at the very least. Another observation about the fountain is it is possible, in response to that comment that was made earlier, which I'd not heard before, which is a very interesting creative concept about a wading pool for young people, is that indeed a wading pool could be created around the fountain. It just doesn't have to be attached to the fountain. Thereby it wouldn't be obliterating the historical context. I think Sam's idea about the additional parking on Merchants Row is also an excellent one. And he's correct that there are many approaches toward historical context. And I also have worked with a lot of historical districts, and I think you're being arbitrary in your interpretation. The bulb outs are a great idea. Lining up the street crosswalks is a great idea. Lastly, in your proposal about the grass in that curved area, you have a whole park behind it that is grass. And that could be so much better utilized in the future for all sorts of purposes as the project is underway. Thank you.
You can go.
Thanks. Just want to go, that was amazing, by the way.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Back to the parking on Merchants Row. I guess I have two questions about that. One is whether or not, this may be a question for you. I'm just going to ask two questions right away. Anyway, one, they're related. Is there a legal avenue for us to make the case for angled parking? Is that something that you've experienced that a town could like hire somebody to do their own interpretation and present the case? Hold that thought. The other one is, if that path wasn't an option, could you guys design as if someday, once you guys are done with this?
Louder, please.
I'm sorry.
Just keep it loud.
Oh, I'll stand up here, maybe that'll help.
Good.
I'm just wondering if you guys could make the assumption that someday we're going to want to turn it into angled parking once you're done with the project. Like, we get that you're stuck with a bunch of rules that force us into bad decisions like that, but I wonder if, knowing that we want angled parking, you could design it in a way that it would be easy for us to just dig it up and redo it in a year from now. You know what I mean? Like landscape timbers for the curbs, or like just cheap something and not put the ashlar blocks in the way and all that stuff. You know, just make it possible for us and easy for us to do that in another couple of years.
Including
Does that make sense?
utilities far enough back
Utility,
so that we
all that
wouldn't
stuff.
have to dig into them.
So, I'm not the expert from our office, but I'm gonna, so essentially for 4F, I think if you're impacting a park for transportation uses, that's illegal. And so that's how we're seeing it. Adding parking spaces to a place that was already a park is a violation of that 4F agreement. As far as legal ways you can stop, I'm not sure. And then the other piece, as far as going back later and potentially adding more parking or doing different things, I'm not completely sure. Maybe Judith can have, or I can just follow up with you guys. Essentially, I believe 4F is a living, essentially like a living, it lives with the park throughout. So if, and I don't want to, and maybe Aaron knows a little bit too, but essentially if you were to come back after our project and just do it with the town and cut into the park after us doing that, I think there's a potential for you to have to pay back the money from the project as well. To avoid, what, you know, I mean, if you think about it, we could do any projects and the town could come back and just change anything after. I mean, it's kind of, so, but I mean, we'll get some language back.
And just to clarify, it's section 4F.
Yeah.
And it's not section 106.
So it's the transportation on public use.
Well, 106 is more related to the historic piece of it. 4F is more related to, it's a public park. And so
just
you cannot convert public park, public land to a transportation use if there are other prudent and feasible alternatives.
Is it my understanding was that it was the sidewalk on the other side being widened to something like 15, 20 feet that is why we can't have angled parking there?
That's not entirely true. We've got the existing angled parking here.
I know, but the sidewalk is going to be doubled.
I'm getting there. If the sidewalk were where it is today, it would make and we put angled parking here, it would make the strip, the travel lane, very, very narrow, and would be it would be a hindrance for emergency vehicles, for pulling in and out of the vehicles. There really wasn't enough room. We did look at that. There really wasn't enough room to be able to get the angled parking and the travel lane within the existing.
How wide would the travel lane be if that were the case?
I forget what it was. I think it was something like 10 feet, but I forget off the top of my head.
So anyways, what you're saying is the extra increase here just came out of not making this as wide.
Right.
If they didn't give it to the sidewalk, it would have been the travel lanes being an odd width.
Right.
So you gained usable space on one side versus just having an overly wide lane for cars to drive.
Thanks, Aaron. Last week at the meeting, I asked a very specific question about strings being attached to the design and use of this park based on the federal dollars that are being used to pay for it now. And somebody answered me and said, no, as soon as the town takes over the park, it's yours, do what you want, design what you want, change it how you want. But I'm now hearing something different, and I think we absolutely need a clarification on that answer.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of people in this room who haven't necessarily been a part of the public meeting process and maybe don't fully understand that this is, at some point we're going to get the best we can from VHB and the state, but that the planning for the future can happen in a more thoughtful, constructive way down the road, but that answer is critical.
That's a fair point, and I'm not sure entirely what you can and can't do. I think we can look into that further. I think what you can't do is build something that is necessarily going to be just temporary, like the timber curbs or whatever like that. We need to provide a finished product, right? It's restoring this area to pre-project condition. So it would be inappropriate for the project design to then say this is going to happen a year down the road, right? There may be some other flexibility beyond that, and I'm not sure. I guess we can talk more with the environmental folks at FHWA. John?
So that was me, and that was in the context of the question about hardscape, which isn't for transportation use. So my understanding, and I think this still is my understanding, that the town owns the park, and when the park is done, and you could correct me if I'm mistaken on that they could add hardscaping after we leave. That was our interpretation. We have got further clarification since last week. I'm not the leading expert on the historic the piece or the federal funding piece, but we do know we can't impact it permanently for the transportation piece.
You can.
Well, so the idea of the 4F is that you as Aaron has said, you cannot convert a 4F property type. In this case, the park, which is both a historic 4F type and a park 4F property. So it's got two 4F types to it. You cannot convert a 4F property type into transportation use as part of a federal aid project. So you can't reduce that amount. You can't change the boundaries. What I'm understanding is that we've got this property. It's town owned, and that's what we're looking at is the ownership of this, and it's a town owned public piece of land.
Yeah, and that's why I was hesitant to completely answer it, but I'm pretty sure it lives with it. But I'll make sure that there's something.
I think
on
we
the
need an
website.
absolute answer on that.
Sure, but yeah, that's the.
Is this all being funded, this whole park project, both sides entirely by this funding? or is a certain part of it going to be the municipality?
It's 95% federally funded and 5% state of Vermont funded.
Which 5?
It's not divided like that. It's a complete project.
Because I thought maybe the parking could be the 5.
It doesn't work that way because there's a federal nexus, it's a federal action, and so all the federal requirements apply to it. You had your hand up for a
Yeah, I
while.
want to get back to the question of more parking. Will it be possible, is it possible to redesign Lazarus Park so there's room for 2 or 3 parking spots at the bottom of the park opposite the building there, since that Lazarus Park is not part of the historic town green?
I think once we get around that corner, we've got, as we heard, you know, we're trying to get the right width for cars to travel through the Printer's Alley. Once we get around the corner, it's not really prudent to throw a few spots right on the corner. And then once we get around the corner where you potentially could, it's on the Marble Ridge property. And so it's not necessarily, it's not part of this project for the development of that portion of the land. Nancy.
Hi, Erin. I have 2 questions. One is back, I don't know which time it was, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be an actual finished product or not. There was some talk that some of it would not be done or paid for. And is there any clarification on that? That was number 1. That's my first question. You want my second? They're totally unrelated.
So let's touch on the funding piece of it. As you see it here, this is something that would all be funded by the project, right? Yes.
Including light fixtures and...
Including light fixtures.
Which aren't on there now.
Including light fixtures in the Village Green area.
Okay.
Light fixtures for Lazarus Park would be on the town to provide.
Are there other things that we should know now are not covered? I mean, like the light fixtures in Lazarus Park?
I'm trying to think.
Watering.
You said there would be water. You said water
I'm trying to think
access?
if there's anything else.
Okay.
If there's any, I think what we were talking about, like if the town wanted to have other amenities,
yes,
like within the green space area, that would be on the town to install.
Okay.
Yeah.
My other question is, we had talked in the past on the corner, the south corner of St. Stephen's, trying to incorporate the Triangle Park more with the existing park. And right now, the way that looks to me, it almost looks like 2 separate pieces. And I think a little more organic flow would give a lot more versatility to that space. But I thought I saw another drawing that you had where the trees were a little bit, I don't know.
That was
softer.
That's in the tunnel.
So there's
and then take out a tree or something.
There's a couple of constraints. Is the utilities, which are the gray boxes that are shown here, which those are removable at this point. I guess there is some space between the utilities and the church.
There's about 30 feet anyway.
There is the drainage structure there, an inlet, drainage inlet. But beside that, I think potentially we can open that up, right?
I mean, there's the potential if you wanted to swing a path to connect to this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's probably a walk there, right?
People
it
will
would be used.
That's going to be used that way anyway. Just like the comment where back last week, how the corners it didn't make sense to have grass in the corners because they would be walked over. Likewise, that's going to be a path.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did you say that the power box, they are not movable at this point?
No, they're not. Yeah. So one of them is a controller box for the lights, the street lights downtown. One of them is a single phase transformer, and we got rid of the power line that goes across Merchants Row. It's now underground, and then there's a pole box there for telecommunications. Yep, in the back.
I'd like to second what Nancy said. I think it's really important that there be an organic feeling from this corner park as part of the bigger park. And you're right, people are going to walk there anyway, so if you could include that in your design, that would really be helpful.
So there is one limitation there, and this, I don't know if this could be something that the town picks up afterwards, but our project limits really are right about at that drainage structure. And so if we bring a path that way, it's
Somebody else has to finish it?
a path to nowhere, right?
We'll work that
And
out.
so,
But I have a question.
sure.
And that is, there have been a lot of trees removed from our village green. So are those trees, the number of trees that are there now, or is that just a gentle sketch? Because I have a feeling there are not nearly that many trees. Are there more? Okay.
There are more of the purposely planted and decorative trees. I think there's a lot of the scrub trees that have grown up over time as part of the railroad cut.
I'm thinking the big one, no, I'm not, I'm talking about on the whole village green.
The big
Oh,
one.
the big green? That may just be a sketch. It may not be completely.
I took off the air photo and part
Okay.
of the survey we have, yeah.
So it may not be completely representative. We're not touching that part of the green.
Yeah.
So what are the widths of Printer's Alley in this concept?
Yeah, it's, you're talking about the roadway?
Yeah.
Yeah, 12 feet.
12 feet? So as of, I guess it's last week, the select board approved Middle Seymour Street as the new location of the train station. And so Printer's Alley is now the main flat route from that train station location into downtown and the south side of town. So this is going to be a heavy route for pedestrian traffic and then also potentially bicycle traffic as well. And I have noticed, I believe that at the last public meeting you had mentioned the sidewalk along the bank is 5 feet. Measuring just myself on a normal bicycle, pushing it up the hill, I take 3.5 feet. So the comment at the last public meeting was any bicycles coming out of the Marble Works towards downtown would get off and push up the hill. That then becomes a problem if there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. And so what we're doing is we're setting up a situation where we don't really have great access coming out of the Marble Works. And so I'm hoping that, you know, a next roadway could be shifted an extra foot over to allow uphill bicycle access to not be impacting with pedestrians, or leave enough room to get past cars coming uphill, rather than forcing people to make the bad choice of either riding just against traffic on the one-way downhill or push people off the sidewalk into the roadway.
Yeah, that was noted. The sidewalk is 5.5 feet, so 5 foot sidewalk, that's standard width for a sidewalk, and then 6-inch curve. So in total, 5.5 feet. There's just not enough room to push that, and you said push it a foot. So you take 3.5 feet just walking it, how much room do you need to ride it? It's not just a foot. And so there really isn't room to push any further and create some type of a separated bike lane. I think it's going to have to be somewhat, you know, common courtesy on the sidewalk. This is not a substandard width for a sidewalk.
So with that though, so you said the road width, the lane width is 12 feet. A normal large box truck is the 10-foot width.
Is that about 8 feet, 8'6" maybe?
Because V-Trans is using 11 feet for the state highway, like Route 7 in the new construction has 10-foot lanes. So going beyond that to prioritize more lane for auto traffic is above and beyond. And so
not for a one-way street, right? You're talking about Route 7, so you've got your lane, you've got a shoulder, you've got another lane on the other side, and it's not a one-way. So this is pretty standard and just about the minimum you want for a one-way roadway.
Is it one way up or down?
One way down into the Marble Works.
Yeah. I'm back to the fountain, sorry. Could you please, I think I can see it, but could you please show me with your ruler where the track is under the oval green spot?
Right like that.
So there really is plenty of room for a 12-foot fountain behind there. And in many respects, it's a very nice kind of a thing to have back by the memorial garden. It certainly is not out of keeping. And that might give you a bit more capacity to use that front piece that everybody is struggling to make bigger than it's going to be. It seems to me that if you keep it on the historical plane, move it back, it would be a prominent feature there, but probably more out of the way of the kinds of things that people want to have happen up front. That would not be a historic issue, would it?
So there are several factors that we're considering in the design here. The fountain, remember Triangle Park has been much smaller than what's being shown here.
Well, I understand that, but
and the fountain was in the center of that. So its original location was fairly close to the intersection and fairly prominent to folks walking or riding their carriages through town in this location. We're moving it around still, where it's not in its original. It was pushed back a little bit further, so we're actually moving it a little bit further forward, trying to accommodate more space in that area. I'm concerned that moving it back will make it less prominent. It's exactly what, different from what you're saying. But what we're also looking at here is that this park is within the context of the overall Middlebury Historic District. So we're looking at a design that needs to fit into a village of this era with a lot of buildings and design with symmetrical, the architectural features are very symmetrical on the facades of the buildings. We're looking to create a park that is that fits within that context of the historic district, but also accommodates the needs, the current needs. So there's a visual aspect to it that needs to fit within this sort of symmetrical era, this era of some very symmetrical design, but also accommodating what you're looking for while respecting the fountain's history and prominence. And we're trying to walk a fine line here of not just putting it back exactly as it was to be exactly as the historic was, but try to keep some of that historic integrity there and make this park usable and
Well, I think we're all looking for the same thing.
I think we are too.
It certainly would be prominent back. There is no doubt about the prominence. I happen to have been here in '76 when there was a hoo-ha about resurrecting it. And it just seems to me that if we are looking at a real need for things that are happening in the town today, we have relatively little space in the center of town. This is pretty much it. And if we can keep it on the central axis, if we can keep it prominent, if we can take a chunk of space that is badly needed for other kinds of civic activities, it seems to me we ought to be able to reach a compromise. It's not going to be on the tunnel. I can understand not wanting it out of the tunnel. And it does seem as though it really does give the capacity for kinds of activity that people are really, really looking for. We got to preserve this wonderful downtown that we have.
Right.
And this is a piece of preservation, is being able to use space, limited space that we have in ways that we can use now.
I completely agree with everything you said. And
so fine, let's move it.
Great, they said move it.
Go ahead, Aaron. I think there is still a concern about the tunnel.
I've got 2 points to make about that. One is, I want to get back to, we just got done this discussion about let's make the base bigger, right? And now the sentiment of we want to use that space for something else. And so I think we're as a team here trying to absorb all the comments, trying to put them together into a package that is representative of really all the input we get. So it's not just one thought or another thought.
Take a vote.
How about a show of hands?
So, well, it's not always up to a show of hands. I think the other thing about the fountain and behind the tunnel, there are some logistical issues with utilities being able to cross the tunnel. Very shallow, so water lines being able to cross the top of the tunnel or drain lines.
Bring them around from the other side.
Could be an issue.
There are ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been here since 1976, so I can't speak to that. But I was listening to both of your comments about wishing to maintain the integrity of the earlier park, the historic significance closer to the Main Street and Merchants Row. I'm not hearing a compelling argument for moving it further back, and I also haven't heard much of an argument for what will happen as a result. How will it impact by moving it back? How will it impact the activities that have yet to be identified? I mean, I think back to pictures that I've seen of events, of various events that have taken place in the park over the years, anti-Vietnam War events, which have been right up along the perimeter of the street. I'm not really seeing why the fountain, which wasn't there in '68, I guess, am I correct, Peg? Why that would interfere. So I think if someone here could make a compelling argument why we should move that fountain off axis, as was suggested, which that doesn't sound like that's going to happen, or move it back 15 feet, maybe people would really hear it. But I would speak strongly in favor of keeping the fountain right where it is.
I can give you my thoughts as I was going through this. I mean, architecturally, geometry-wise, there's three options. You're back here as a focal point terminus. You're more around in this territory. It's kind of where it is now. Or you're up close to the front. Back here, the way we have it set up, this is a separate garden that was supposed to be a little quieter, a little place of contemplation, a little more private. Putting it in the center definitely disrupted it as they started trying to lay out other items and, like, say, events were going on. This gave you 2 points, almost like dumbbells for people to congregate around. If I moved it here, then the garden piece is gone. You can't just put 2 things right next to each other and expect they're going to be compatible. It's either one or the other. This way, you got 2 separate spaces that are entirely different in feel from each other. Okay.
Yeah, I think that if it was moved near the garden, and we're trying to attract young families, and the fountain does attract children, then just like my grandchildren wanted to do, they're going to want to race around and round and round in the memory garden when we go to the green. So I like it where it is, or moved on that access where it's still hardscape before the path. And I'd like to know about the base, because I like the base. If I remember, if we were there with our kids, we could sit on the base where the kid was playing and splashing so they wouldn't drown.
Yeah, it is raised off the ground. It is off the ground.
So another point is being able to sit. If you want to attract, I mean, kids just like the green and the gazebo. Give them the gazebo. They don't need a slide. But if you can, when I was a mom, now a grandma, sitting on the edge of the fountain with the base back, with little kids around, it would be a focal point. I would take them there while their folks went shopping or lunch. So I prefer that it stay on that access, that it have the base, because it gives you a place to sit next to your children that we're trying to attract.
I was also a little uncomfortable with bringing a public feature. There's a columbarium right here. I mean, it seems like a little quieter spot if you were there, you know, grieving a loved one or something, to bringing an active public feature right up next to you. Okay.
I want to say something about the ashlar blocks and the hardscape. There are a lot of ashlar blocks available, but not that many are used in here. Could some be placed along the path in Lazarus Park, maybe?
Actually, from last week, I added quite a few in this one. There's one running along the whole length of this.
Oh, okay.
There's another one here at that intersection, and there's this one coming through there.
Okay.
And this one was a little bit in response to the comments about vehicles like jump the curb or something.
And the ones that are along the path in the park, you
Yeah,
know, in order.
Okay, go ahead.
Either place. In order for people to have conversations, maybe there could be one at an angle to the other or in front of the other. So it's not just one bench, but it's 2 blocks so that people could have a conversation area. And the hardscape, if that whole triangle were paved, I think it would really need something within it like raised planters or trees, because it's going to be broiling hot in the summer and bleak and windswept in the winter. And even though a big plaza is flexible, it also repels people. People go where there's something to gather around. So I don't want to see any more hardscape than that, at least to start out with.
Fred?
Fred Dunnington. Those blocks, those stone blocks, I mean, I understand their use in a wall, and I haven't really seen the edge, what happens when you take them apart and how comfy they would be to sit on. Now, stone can be taken to bury and ground, you know, to make it a little smoother. I don't know whether that's something that would be considered, but I think where you're using it for the walls, that's fine. But if you're using it to sit on, let's make this park at least comfortable to sit in.
That raises the other question about its appropriateness to that historic fountain. I mean, this is a more contemporary and hard-edged look that you're considering.
Well, I
think historically it was concrete walk around it.
It doesn't make it right. In Virginia, it was.
I'm just going to put in a plea for the seating to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Use the blocks in intelligent ways, but you know, if they're going to be as rough as they are on the outside, the town will be funding cushions for them.
Fairly smooth stacks.
Yeah, for some reason I think that the top surface is fairly smooth.
Is it?
And the surface that you see exposed is the rougher surface.
Okay, well, make them comfortable, please.
Eat more, Fred.
The bluish colored surface, there's a different surface treatment just to the left of that curved walk. Could you describe that a little bit? Is that something that can be driven on, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I was
friendly to
considering
roll,
it almost like the granite
strollers
paver.
on, or what is it?
Similar to like the pavers that you might see in the middle of the roundabout here.
So not that friendly for strollers or.
Oh, they can come in a variety of textures.
What's it made out of?
Granite, but it's granite, but also matching surfaces here at the bump outs for the crosswalks.
This is probably picked to be rough on purpose to create a rumble effect for cars. Possibly this, would be a smoother surface. It'd have to be ADA passable, so strollers could go on it.
And those, the control cabinet for the downtown lighting and the transformer, can there be some landscaping around those things? Since you put the transformer there, is that something that you could justify?
One of the things we were doing here, these are shown as large shrub masses. We were trying to screen this off from views from the park.
Well, maybe that last tree would, and the other opening, if it were a little more thought given to how you could both shrub around the utility structures, but create some openings and not have the line of trees be such or the wall be such a barrier.
Yeah, I think we'll put some more thought into that area there. I think all the way in the back, you've got your hand up several times.
With regard to the different designs in the ADA, compliant design, what is the impact that you described on the Marble Works property? Like how far impacted is this property with the ADA compliant design?
Yeah, I don't know that we fully quantified how far. We just know that it is.
Generally, I mean, do you have any
Throw an idea.
I wouldn't want to wager a guess on the area there, but it is significantly onto the property. It's not like it's just a little bit of a corner, but.
I do like the idea of having an ADA compliant, route behind there, for strollers, for, folks that maybe are, using wheelchairs or other, get around devices. I think that would be really helpful, especially in downtown.
So could you take your bike through there too? In Lazarus Park? It's that kind of surface, right?
I would think you could walk. It would be appropriate to walk your bike through there, I think.
It seems to me that's better than messing with the width of the road.
Yeah.
And I surely don't want to remove that sidewalk that provides you with direct access from Main Street down to the river. That's all I have.
Is there any place to pee?
Some bushes.
Well, I'm serious. Ben Franklin had a great bathroom. That's gone, and then the diner closed. So there, where do you pee?
Here in this building.
This is a good bathroom.
Oh, you can go here now?
Yeah.
It's open? Okay, not in the evening, but you can.
No,
I didn't know you
Saturdays
could
or
just help
Sundays.
yourself here. And anywhere else?
Library.
The library?
Library.
Okay. Just curious. You get all these people to come and then they can't pee.
So we heard a lot of folks talk about wanting some more access to the fountain water as an attractive thing for kids. And it sounds like we're constrained by the design of the fountain and its base. Could its base be just recessed an extra foot lower and made the pool shallower so that the existing basin and have the existing marble, it has, if I remember, it has crenellations on it, some higher spots and lower spots, so that it actually could be more of a wading pool around the fountain, retaining that marble, but just be shallower and not quite so deep.
That's a nice idea.
Is there any problem with
I don't-
animals or anything?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the measurements of it, but, it's, the preference is to make it, is to use the material and the fountain in its historic design. If there's a way to modify it just slightly for something like that, we can certainly look at it, but I just don't know. In the images I've seen, I don't think it really sits up that high. I think some of the crenellated
Yeah.
pieces do, but I don't think that
So if the lower pieces are about 1.5 feet, they're not really a small child would climb over, and then the water was about maybe 8 inches deep. If the water level is able to be dropped to 4 inches, and
Well, wouldn't you just raise the base
or raise
inside the fountain?
Yeah, sure, and maybe lower the wall or something, some combination of that to make it more accessible for play and splashing, while still retaining the marble.
Oh, something to look at.
To consider. Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks. I want to go back to the parking, and I just want to explain my thinking around this, is that, in my opinion, I may be wrong, I think this is the last downtown space that could accommodate a farmer's market.
That's what the hardscape is all
Which is
about.
why a lot of people have been asking for
Yep.
hardscape all
Yep.
along. And I think it's why some people are asking for angled parking for the purpose of just having more downtown parking. I brought up angled parking for the purpose of vendor trucks being able to back up to the sidewalks around the edges of the park, because at least half of the farmers market vendors would prefer that kind of access if they were ever to choose to come back downtown. I have to say that when they were in the Riverside Park and in the Marble Works, the market on Saturday morning was a huge draw for people to come downtown in the first place. And now that it's out of town, the market has dropped off to about half of its vendors from what it used to have. I don't know what their revenues are like now, but that whole synergy of people going to the market and then going to shops around town and going out for brunch or whatever, it's just not happening anymore. So it's a huge change for our downtown to not have the farmers market anymore. And I don't know if Riverside Park or the Marble Works would ever invite them back into that space, but we can't really count on that, which leads us to this park. So I just want to throw out and I get that we've got all these obstacles to actually having angled parking. Maybe the town could look at the streetscapes and whether we need a turning lane into the Merchants Row from Main Street to buy some space for angled parking. But just one more idea, and I'll just throw it out there, is could you design it to be a place that trucks could back into on special occasions like Saturday mornings? Like, could it be parallel parking as you've shown it, but could the curbs be roll-up curbs, and there be enough hardscaping and no barriers like tree trunks and ashlar blocks to that extra 10 feet that the back half of a truck would need, plus the pop-up tent, plus the sidewalk? See where I'm going with this? So I guess the question is basically roll up curbs and then design for that being a special event. And does that, why, just whatever reasons, whether that would not be historically appropriate or something like that?
And my question is your drop, do you think your drop in farmers market is due to lack of vendors being able to access the space, or the lack of people being access to the space?
The drop is because the vet market was made to move outside
Out of town.
It's outside of the pedestrian boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah, Matt, we've had quite a few comments about farmers market, so.
And Hannah Sessions was here at the last meeting, and she did say much of what you're saying, that they have dropped off, they would love to come downtown. She said that the way it is configured, am I right, that it would work the way it's configured now? It wouldn't, she was not advocating for angle parking necessarily. She thought that the angle parking that there was would be adequate, and she thought they had workarounds to make it work, but they were very interested in coming back to this park, and the hardscape was important to them as well.
And I think there's a variety of configurations that could potentially happen there, whether it's utilizing just the park space in front of the church, extending around the church, or, I mean, it would have to, all this would have to be coordinated with the town, but even using Merchants Row,
right.
There's a great hardscape space there as well. And so there is, you know, a number of different configurations that could accommodate those types of.
Speak to the idea of the roll-up curbs, though.
I don't think roll-up curbs would be an obstacle. I mean, I think if there was specific use and we could identify specific use, I don't think it would be any against any of the regulations that we have to follow.
Just to speak to that, when Carrera Family Park was now Schaefer's Market, Paul Carrera went out of his way to make sure that the curves there had a very low rise. They weren't your bridge curve, okay? They were about 4 or 5 inches high, so people could open their doors without scraping them with easy access from the street to the market. And as an alternative to roll-up curbs, if you're going to have granite curbs, like you sometimes plan to in the downtown, you could just make them easier to mount without having a rolled shape.
Yeah, I don't know the complete regulations from the highway design perspective, but I believe there's a minimum height for the curb reveal. I mean, curbing is there for the direct drainage, but also to provide protection from the folks that are on it. So I don't know that we can arbitrarily just, we'd have to look at that, but I believe from a design standpoint.
When you did the Cross Street Bridge project and redid College Street, make it work there.
I'm not sure, you know, about that side of College Street, but understood. Comment noted. Yeah.
How deep is the deepest part of the curve of grass there, which is on the access from the corner?
Across the middle here?
Yeah.
From the bench
Yeah.
piece?
Yeah.
37 feet.
So what I was thinking again, if we were hoping for more hardscape and have farmer's market and other big things there, and the fountain were moved back to the edge of the curve, it would be far, it seemed to me, far enough from the memorial garden, and it would mean children who've been running in the water would have grass in the warm time of the year when the water's there, grass to run on, which would be a whole lot nicer than hardscape. What do you think, Moms?
I don't want that fountain design for ages under 6. I'm going to avoid that park because I don't want the kids jumping in and out of a nasty fountain. I don't think that type of fountain design is really designed for kids as a play. It's not like a design for some, like in urban areas like Montreal where the water does come out of the ground and it can be easily cleaned when it's turned off. I would say this fountain design doesn't make me excited to have kids in it, but thank you for asking, but I'm staying quiet because I'm feeling like we have to have the fountain, but I will say the fountain is not a draw to me like one slide or like a play pool.
I just want to piggyback on that also as a mom of young children. I feel like you're absolutely right, and a fountain that does do that well is in Bristol in the green. There's that fountain that maybe it's a little bit, Adam, like you were describing, it's a little more recessed, so kids are always in that fountain, and it's so much fun, and it never feels like anybody's gonna, like ruin themselves in it, and it seems clean. They clean it regularly, so it's nice. That's a fountain that really is a draw, but it's also next to a playground. So the only reason we go to that fountain is because we go to the playground. But when we're at the playground, we go to the bakery, we go to the stationery shop, we do all those things. And I also wanted to piggyback that comment with the fountain being like some kind of draw for kids. I think it's weird to think about the fountain as a draw for kids, and I think we should be thinking of the farmer's market as a draw for kids, because in order to draw kids into town, young kids, you have to draw their parents into town. And the parents aren't going to bring their kids out to go look at a fountain, to go like play in a sort of nasty fountain. Just like the gazebo in the town green, which is always filled with beer cans and other horrible things, and it's not a place you want to bring your kids. So I feel like if we can make this space a place where we can have family-friendly events like farmers markets and other fun events that are going to get people in general out there, then kids are going to also appreciate the space. And if you throw in a climbing structure or a slide, all the better. But I think considering thinking about the fountain as a draw is misguided, and yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Amen. As an aside, I've been here since 1975. I have never, ever seen a child even putting their hand in that fountain, let alone their feet in it. I never have, including my own or my own grandchildren. So that's not what we're dealing with.
It seems to me like the takeaway from all the public meetings and the different concepts and the working draft is that the best that Middlebury can hope for right now is something that's functional for the next few years, but that this community really wants to make something more out of this space. And it sounds like we want to make something more out of the entire green, not just this triangle park. So if we can get the designers and the town, the select board and the design advisory, all those people who are going to be the decision makers, to give us something that we can manage in the future, to me that's sort of the best possible outcome at this point. My fear, my concern is that we won't get enough of the base or the infrastructure or the power, the water, the whatever, or if we don't get specific guidance or answers about what exactly can the town do down the road, then we're always going to have this unanswered question. We're always going to have this, well, what if, or what would happen if we could have done it this way or that way. So, I mean, I think we're on generally the right path. You know, I also will echo what Nancy said. I work downtown, and I'm right across the street from the fountain. And aside from the aesthetic of it having a tarp on it, which I've mentioned before, you know, that the park itself has never been a place where people congregate. It was a narrow space. There was a fence around, you know, the drop off to the rail. There was one garbage can over there, which whenever I did see somebody over there, that's all they were doing, was walking over to the garbage can to throw things away. But it was such a limited space. It was unattractive. This is a more attractive version of what was there. I feel like there's still a couple unanswered questions and a couple things that we need to lay the groundwork for in the future. And David's question about, what about designing it so that if you knew we wanted to change something down the road, I mean, I don't know the politics of that or the finances of using one material over another material, but I think, to me, if you know that and the material you do use is still considered finished product material, but it makes it easier for us down the road, then I'm having a hard time finding an argument against that thought process. So I think I've said what I need to say. Also, I will submit on behalf of the Better Middlebury Partnership, the Addison County Chamber of Commerce, Town Hall Theater, and Middlebury Underground, a letter to the Select Board, the Planning Commission, the Design Advisory Council. I won't read it now, but because I think it incorporates the context of a lot of the discussions that have happened today. But I've sent it to Kathleen, and it'll be distributed appropriately.
Really small comment. In terms of what I'm hearing about the farmers market, which I wholeheartedly agree with. There are other events in town like Foodaroo where food trucks are really a main part of it. We live in a vehicular world. That curved path, if it were 8 feet wide and the base were appropriate, you could drive vehicles along that arc and increase the usability of the center of that hardscape by creating an edge. I think Mark's point about edges was very well put. So if that were kind of designed such that vehicles could use that as a way to kind of create a boundary, I think that would be a very easy way to add some functionality to that central space.
Mark, is that top of the tunnel vehicle rated?
Yep. Yeah, we did consider food trucks as well. I think, we were considering more along the edge here and along the curb with the nice wide open. And if you do have, movable tables or seats here, there's quite a few spaces and quite a bit of room, and even extending further up.
I think Mark's point about making rooms is a really wonderful way to put it. And Foodaroo has been incredibly successful in the Marbleworks parking lot. The trucks are all the way on the perimeter and everyone's in the center. So it takes all that energy and it holds it in the middle. And that creates a space. And when it's only one edge, that energy dissipates out into nowhere. We're not a huge community. We're not a big city. So if you're able to hold that space, it really kind of concentrates that energy in a wonderful way.
Actually, the width of this path with the hardscape here, it's certainly tires on different pieces works fine. And, when I did a test laying out 10-foot things, it creates exactly what you were just describing with the center energy piece. I ran 4/10 along here, 4/10 along here. You have access through the middle with the fountain as a focal point. And then I ran a series this way and then like this. So you still had access here, but you had this whole center area for people. If you had tables with the stuff happening all around you, you could. Then when I did it here as well, you had a central piece here. They hooked into these, and you could use that part of the sidewalk for cart deliveries off to either side of the tents.
I think that's probably the biggest theme we've heard throughout all the input, right? We want versatile space, right? And so you could have any number of layouts of tents or trucks or exhibits within the park on Merchants Row, and trying to provide as versatile a space as well and meet all the regulations that we need to meet. And I think that's what we've tried to capture with this working draft.
In that light, then I would say those stone blocks would only get in the way of people going in and out and setting up displays and everything, and movable tables.
So you like
would,
the perpendicular versions better?
Well, just don't use the blocks at all. Create space under those trees that can be used. And movable chairs and tables that can be, people can have their sitting when there's no big event. And then my other thing I'd like to say is when you get to lighting, please be minimal. This town has a light pollution problem already. I live 2 miles away and I can see the glow on the clouds. There's no such thing as dark at my house anymore because of all the lights coming from the village. And a lot of it is from our non-complying streetlights, which are cute but non-complying. and don't add more. You know, keep it to what it has to be, but with fixtures that are truly downcast, and maybe those low bollards that are in the park already.
Just in terms of lighting, do you know, are you planning on using LEDs, or what kind of lighting you're thinking of?
Yeah, that's common use now.
Yeah,
You can
I
adjust
hope
the
you use the
temperature.
most efficient technology available.
LED, he said yes. Could you elaborate a bit more on Lazarus Park? You talked about the Hardscape Curve, and also a little bit better understanding of the tunnel and how that probably will appear not dissimilar from the historical fenced-in tunnel that what used to be Triangle Park. Am I correct visually that that's what's going to happen?
I guess I misunderstood the second part of what you were asking.
Well, historically, there was a tunnel where this proposed expanded Triangle Park is, and it was totally fenced around, and you look down into this opening.
Yeah.
Is that what we're going to be experiencing on the other side?
Similar. At the end of the tunnel, we right now we're looking to have kind of a low height concrete wall, and then vertical steel railing on top of that, and then extending along either edge of the U wall, the full height vertical pedestrian fencing.
It's a decorative fence, though. It's
Correct, yeah.
It's not like a chain link or anything like that, and the idea would be painted or a darker color, something that would fit with the historic context, something very simple.
But in actual, you know, when you walk the path down, you have a filtered layer of, you know, landscape
Shrubbery,
vegetation,
yeah.
from shrubs to flowering trees or canopy trees.
What is defining where the drop-off is so close to the main street?
Here? That would be the partial height concrete.
No, no, I'm sorry, you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say, or I'm miscommunicating, I should say. Is it the depth of the tunnel? In other words, why is the opening so close to the walkway? Could it not be further back?
The reason it's here is because this, if you can think about the vertical profile of the railroad tracks, at this point, the low point is, it's roughly in this area. So the railroad tracks are ascending, you know, upward as we go further to the north. And so at this point here, if the cover on top of the tunnel were to continue, it would also continue up as we move further to the north, which doesn't match the grade of the surrounding land. So now you'd have this concrete box sticking up above the land. So this is the point where we're burying the concrete box, and then the retaining walls on either side will slope down with the slope of the surrounding land.
And that slope was determined by the considerations for the trains, I presume.
Just by what's there.
In other words, while they're digging, couldn't they have dug a little bit so that that recess could have been further back?
Well, the surrounding land is what it is today. You know?
Well, and the reason I say that is it certainly would be helping the profile if it had just moved back whatever distance and you had plantings in front of it. So you didn't have to look at that, and also for sound purposes and the rest. And then secondarily, I had asked about that curved hardscape. What is your intention there?
This year? This year.
Yes.
This is something that it's kind of carried through several of the concepts. It's not necessarily defined, and maybe it's hardscape. If the right-of-way or property line issue isn't resolved, then perhaps this turns into grassed area. I think right now it's just a generic hardscape, some seating around the outside, and then a backdrop of trees and shrubs.
Because it's an interesting concept, because you're actually introducing people, I think, more easily to the Marble Works and the Falls Park by doing that. But I just feel strongly that the promenade aspect coming off the main street is important, And the width of whatever that walkway is very important. I support the idea of people coming from the new train station comfortably into the municipality, and secondarily for the handicapped, for the bicyclists, for the strollers, that they have to be comfortable and inviting people in to use that more readily. It's a terrific potential for a thoroughfare.
So currently at the head or the top there of Lazarus Park, where the opening is for the train, there's a large pipeline. I don't know exactly what it carries. Water. So what's that going to look like when this is all done?
Yeah, so part of the pipe will still be visible, but beyond that partial height concrete wall, there'd be a kind of a ledge at the end of the tunnel. So the pipe will run across, it'll come up out of the ground on the post office side, run across the edge of the tunnel beyond that partial height concrete wall, and then go back underground just
so
to the other side.
It's visible, it's not going to be covered up, or?
It'll be insulated, but if you
It's going to look like a pipe that's insulated.
Yeah.
There's no way to make it more attractive?
Well, there is.
There's not a lot of options to necessarily make it more attractive.
I think the curved roof might even look better than that.
It used to have a fiberglass cover, and that was its insulation. But, you know, rather than describing something that, if you want to extend what it covers over the railroad, it doesn't have to be angled. You could have something that steps up, covers the pipe, makes an elevated sort of plaza, place maybe for a vendor or something, and then resolve the grade towards the post office. We've got plenty of land and public right-of-way to do that. But I understand coming towards the National Bank, you know, that change would be wouldn't be passable unless you made some steps down in that way. But there's a way to cover that over and still maintain the clearance over the railroad, right?
That's an interesting concept.
So there's the physical kind of properties which you talked about before, but then there's just how much of that contributes to the actual project, right? And I'm not sure that extending that roof for the sake of additional public space would fall under, you know, the scope of this project. It's more structure to maintain. There's the issue of the grading on the National Bank side. It doesn't seem like it's a feasible.
Could you look at it though? Could you look at that? Because that, to Fred's point, it's a real eyesore the way it is, and this is extremely important. This is the center of our town, and if there's a way that it could be enclosed and made more attractive, then why not?
I understand that point. It's been made before. I just don't think it's part of this project to be able to extend that further. There's a couple of things. As we discussed, you've got the rising grade of the tunnel, of the concrete box, and you've got the falling grade of the surrounding land on the National Bank of Middlebury side and on the post office side. We cannot increase the grade along the post office. They have an entrance that needs to be maintained to their basement. That's been made very clear by them. And so there's just not, the geometry doesn't work out to be able to continue up, keep the clearance, have the cover. You end up with a concrete box sticking out of the ground.
But the step-up concept does have merit, and design-wise, I think it's an interesting concept. You should consider it.
Well, it sounds like, though, you're saying this is not part of your purview with this project, but could you design it in such a way that it would be very easy and less expensive for the town to maybe do something after you're done with your project and you're gone?
I'm going to say no, because this is owned by the state of Vermont, and the state would not necessarily, they wouldn't allow the town to continue and build.
Well, I just wanted to
additional
cover
cover.
out the pipeline mostly, that's what I was.
Oh, we can look at alternative ways to potentially camouflage or hide the pipe. For extending the cover, it's not something that the state would allow the town to do after.
What is the pipe for?
It's for water. It's for water.
It's a Main Street water line.
Which is kind of interesting to be able to visibly see a piece of infrastructure and ponder, like, what is under the street? I mean, if it were painted a dark color, it'd be kind of a curiosity.
Windows.
Dollar signs on it. This ain't free, kids.
I can imagine having a curved trellis, wooden trellis over that with lines growing on it. It's not something you would probably fund with this, but, you know, it's something
In a few years, it'll
could be done later on.
It's not something the project would fund, and I think, again, going back to the state maintaining their infrastructure, I could see that being removed by the state. It's generally not good practice to have things growing in your structures.
How long has it been since the state has been back, excuse me, to maintain that?
Very
I think in between we could do a lot.
Comment noted. I think the state has done more maintenance than is probably understood through there.
So a question for Mark. This ADA accessible walkway that's coming down, what is the width of that?
I think I drew it at 6 feet.
So would that be something that we could expand by an extra foot or two of width to allow bicycles or scooters or others to use that with opposing pedestrians and strollers safely? If there's not room in the road, could that become a path?
I'm not exactly sure the exact width you need as a multi-use path, whether it's 8 or 10. If it's 10, it's probably a little big.
Well, we have sidewalks throughout town, everywhere other than Main Street, where scooters, bicycles, everything is allowed. They just must yield to pedestrians. My hope is that if we're making a path through there, that we don't just arbitrarily restrict the width so much that it's passing a pedestrian, there's a fear of handlebars catching. If we can make it 8 feet wide, all of a sudden that
take a look at it.
becomes a lot more usable for two-way
Certainly the
wheel
grade
travel.
will give you a better chance of getting uphill on it.
The cross street bridge sidewalks were 8 feet generally.
And with the railing, those are a little narrow. When we see kids riding to school.
We came a long way from the original 5 foot. Thankful.
In conclusion, I'd like to respond to, and I'm afraid I don't know your name, Amy's comments. And that is to design a project like this with the understanding that this is the best we can do for now, I don't think is a healthy attitude. I really think that the community has to do the best they can to be as decisive as they can to do a great park, a great streetscape, a great access and thoroughfare from one area to the next. We shouldn't settle for this is the best we can do for now.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying it was made crystal clear by V-Trans and Jim and these folks that there's a certain amount of funding for this park to be put back the way it was, and we don't really have a say. There are certain elements we just don't have a say about.
Do not cost any different. And this is what we have to argue.
Oh, this park will cost a lot more than what you had before, let me tell you. And we are taking it pretty seriously.
But so did the
Yeah, I mean, just
community
the
suffer
two
as a
things that we're
result of
looking at
this.
are historics, you know, that's a big piece, these are laws, and then also the park use and transportation and adversely impacting the park. Those are the two main things we're really talking about. Other than that, you know, we're just trying to make I think they did a great job putting together something to combine the two, Triangle Park and the other area. Those are the two restrictions.
And I think
Other than that,
and I think the reality is if the funding source wasn't a limiting factor, this would look remarkably different. I mean, this would be so different from what's here.
It wouldn't be if I was designing it. This is what I thought was going to be very, very nice for this community.
I think if this process was vetted appropriately, which I don't believe it was, through the town planning process, we wouldn't be constrained between decision-making that started in June and is going to end next week. I think the process would have gone on much longer, more extensively. There would have been more public input. There would have been more design iterations. I mean, I think it's been articulated that there are a lot of people who are not psyched about how crammed this process is. And I mean, I know that there's project deadlines and a fear of delaying those project deadlines, and a whole lot of pressure on the select board to make a decision on December 11th. I, for one, think that's unfair to our town, but I also recognize the constraints for the project at large. And I'm trying to weigh, personally, the difference between delaying the end of the project. I mean, it's already been delayed so long because of so much opposition to different phases of the project. My point is that with this piece of it, if we can get the slate as clean as possible, so that we can, at some point in the future, as a town and as a community, design this space for the best possible space that we can get. I'm just trying to be realistic about where we are in the process. But I think that the concepts that are out there.
That's not going to happen. There's not going to be another iteration after this, because
I don't believe that. I think there will be.
20 years from now.
Well, I'll still be around.
I won't.
I just want to compliment Mark. I think this design is a lot better than what we started with. I think it's really responsive to what you heard from the PC and DAC. This is the first time I've seen it, and I just think that it gives you a really nice template from which to work from. You know, we can say a lot of things about College Park now because we've had a chance to live with it for a year or so, you know. So maybe we just need a chance to live with this for a little while and figure out how we can use that space. But I think it's pretty responsibly giving us a good template to work from, and maybe that's a little bit of what Amy's saying too.
Well, and at the last meeting, I think Jim said, you know, again, that what the select board is being asked to approve is a concept. Right? This is not the absolute final design. Do I have that correct?
I think there are pieces that will continue to be
still be a little moving parts.
Refined and added.
Like the light structure,
the lighting,
planning,
or moving benches and small stuff. But we're really, you know, kind of geared up to jump into the final design, the grading, the drainage, and get everything moving forward and into the project so that it can be constructed.
So thanks for your efforts on that, is what I'm saying.
I know you guys are so done with us. I just have one quick question. Is there any, I know like in College Park, there's an underground outlet for doing like the outdoor movies and stuff. Is there any infrastructure in this design? And if there's not, and we wanted to include something like that, could you let us know so we could maybe consider?
Yeah, and so in order.
I know some of my fellow select board members want this whole thing paid for.
In order to run the.
Sometimes I want little things that I'm willing to chip in for.
No, they can.
In order to run the fountain, there does need to be electricity for a pump.
You know what I mean, like a recessed.
Oh, hold on.
Okay, sorry.
Hold on. So there's electricity for that. I think likely to be electrical source in whatever enclosure there is in the ground near the pump. There will also be the street lights that are along the edge of the street. We're actually just talking today. I think there's some lights that can accommodate
in the poles,
outlets and potentially locking enclosures so that the town can.
How about along the walk by the church, back walk? Will there be lights there?
We haven't gotten that far in the design yet, but likely very low level, non-intrusive lights back there.
That's something.
And in Lazarus Park, on that walk?
So Lazarus Park, we are committed to working on a design for this, but the project won't be installing the light fixtures. We'll install the infrastructure for conduits and bases, but then installing the fixtures would be paid for by the town. Yep.
All right.
Is there any opportunity for unique paving patterns or colors? Like, I feel like I agree that this plan is good. It sort of sweeps the fountain towards the street and makes it part of the edge. I agree that people hang out at the edge, not on the middle. You know, as far as a play element, it could be something like stumps along in between the trees in the back. I mean, that's better than, I don't think a playground is right for this space, but even if that arc had, you know, 2 different colors of paving, that is now a play feature that kids are going to step on and jump through, and you know they'll play on it if it's a different color or whatever. I agree that the connection around the church into the green could be a little more like loose. You know, the paving could even like disintegrate in a way, like because you have path and structure into green, so it should just sort of like you could make it a path to nowhere almost intentionally. So I agree that the fountain, and if you put the fountain in the back past the tunnel, it'll be lost. It'll be blend into the church. You won't see it. And the conflict with the other garden too. I agree, like treating the fountain like with trees in the street. It's good. It sweeps out the space so you can do whatever you want in the middle. So I was just, you know, like if the details could include maybe thinking of not just granite blue and concrete gray, but some kind of pattern or, I don't know, some kind of, you know, a lot can be done in the little details that make it interesting. Even like someone that said the, you know, positioning benches so they're not just in a row, so you could have a conversation. Like little stuff like that, I think could do a lot.
We should probably wrap up. It's after 9 here. Listen, does anybody have any final comments, things that they want to have said? Dave?
I've just been in touch with the farmers market about this, so I've just got some feedback from them that I can just talk to you guys after.
Talk about it. Or not.
You don't want to
Well, I'll share that Hannah, I just shared this design with Hannah, who's the president of the farmers market, and her feedback was that the idea of roll-up, like if nothing else, the idea of being able to back into those spaces with trucks, with the roll-up curves, is like their last ditch option, really. Like somebody thought that you had said that she thought it was okay the way it is, but she just.
That's what she said.
She just, I just talked to her about it, and she thinks it's absolutely critical for trucks to be able to back up into that space from the street. So if you guys could figure that one out, then I'd be like gung-ho behind your design. And I guess that implicates like the benches and the planting areas that you're showing around those edges, and I'm not sure what the solution is there, but if you can figure that out, that'd be great.
Especially if they're stone.
So can you explain what's going to happen now? Like, when the select board, are you just going to bring a design to the select board and they have to approve it, or do they have a final say? Can they say change this, do this, or what's going on?
Sure, Aaron, you want to walk
Yeah, so we're gonna, I mean, this is our working draft. We're, obviously we got a lot more input tonight. I think a lot of what we've got here really fits with a lot of, like, again, the major themes that we're hearing. There may be some small tweaks that we look at, you know, along the street edge, or do we look at, you know, different configuration for benches or flowers. But our intent is to take this working draft, make some tweaks and modifications, and then when we get in front of the select board, we're going to go back and we're going to recap the process we've gone through, the input we've gotten, and we're going to present our recommended alternative, and we're going to ask for their endorsement. It doesn't mean that the select board can't say, look, we really don't like this. We'd rather go back to the perpendicular benches. I think there could be little things like that, but we're looking for endorsement of the main concept here.
Will the design advisory and planning commission notes make their way to these guys before the draft is finalized to the select board?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both meeting later this week.
I knew that, I just didn't know if,
We're both meeting, one on Thursday and one on Friday
Right.
noon, and we'll draft our.
I'm just thinking that, I was thinking of the timeline, so when you guys are done at Friday at
It'll
noon.
go to the select board directly.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm
No,
asking if the comments from those two groups.
It'll go to Jim. Jim's got an action item to get it to us on Thursday and on Friday.
I think staff can handle that for them.
Yeah.
And then Mark's got all weekend to look at it.
Natalie, just make sure anything you write goes back through me, and then I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go. Okay.
Mark's got nothing else to do this week.
Thank you all for a good, great meeting, appreciate it.
Yeah.